solicitation. You obviously found it just fine. If you didn't sign in, can you hear me at the back, at the very, very back? Perfect. If you didn't sign in, make sure you sign in on your way out. This is attendance, so it just helps me keep track of who isn't here for the assignment. Just wanted to remind you this story is due November 20th, so you've got a couple of weeks from today to get it done. Our plan today is to go through till about 2:45 without any breaks. Obviously, if you need to take a break, just take off whenever you need to, but please come back. I am planning on leaving about 30 minutes at the end of the session for questions from you guys. So save any questions that you have. Pretty much any question is fair game, within reason, obviously, but they'll tell you if it's not. And also the panelists, I'm not sure if there's a class in here at 3. If there isn't one at 3, the panelists will hang around for a few minutes after. So make a point of coming down and saying hello and introducing yourself, and any questions that you might have just for them. And I think I mentioned possibly in an email that Kevin Rushworth unfortunately had a work conflict, so he's not here today. So the other 3 panelists that are listed on your on the assignment are here. And I'm just going to introduce them all very, very quickly. I'm not going to introduce them as fully as they're introduced on the assignment. But we'll start with Amy Price. Amy graduated, and she's right there. Thank you, Amy. Graduated from this program in 2016. She moved into a communications job with the Canadian Mental Health Association Calgary region, where she did her practicum as well. And she's going to talk about what her job consists of, so I'm not going to cover that. Trevor Back, our token male today, he's the president of Back 40 Communications. He's a journalism and communications firm in Calgary. He also will talk a little bit more about what his job entails once we get going. Krista Conrad is the third member of the panel. Krista graduated in 2015 from this program, and she now works at the Okotoks Western Wheel as a general reporter. Well, general reporter, can I call you that? Okay. She'll clarify that. So please keep in mind all the bios, all the correct spellings of people's names are on the assignment. So no excuse for getting anything wrong. And just a very gentle reminder, any misspelled names, it's a $10. Wouldn't that be? I could make a lot of money doing this. It's a 10-mark deduction. So again, make sure you sign the attendance on your way out. Feel free to use any recording devices and take notes. Please keep in mind, like I always talk about, more notes is better than fewer notes. So so I think what I'd like to do is just start with a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just talk a little bit for 1 or 2 minutes each on what your current job entails. And you can share the mics there. I believe they're turned on. So Amy, do you want to start that off?
Sure. Is this on? Okay, yeah. Can you guys hear me in the back? Perfect. I apologize, I'm not the best public speaker. This is actually my first time, so I'm a little nervous. But so I work with Canadian Mental Health Association. I do communications. A lot of my job is back-end website work. Most of it is actually consists of social media, so creating a consistent brand across our social media platforms. It includes Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm on our accounts every day. I manage everything that comes in. Any intakes, whether it's requests for volunteering, job applications, any questions, I kind of filter them to the appropriate places. I also attend a lot of trade shows and wellness fairs, so I'm out in the community almost weekly, just advocating for mental health, telling people about our services, that kind of stuff. What I do website-wise is I manage our Balance blog, so I connect with people, probably anywhere between 10 to 20 people a month, talking about their stories, resilient mental health stories to be specific, and sharing them on our Balance blog to create a positive conversation around mental health.
I'll maybe get each of you to just talk very briefly about how you got into that job, sort of how you got into your job and what the job entails. We'll do two at one.
So I consider myself pretty lucky considering that I got my job out of my practicum. It was actually, I wasn't sure where I wanted to go with my practicum, so I had talked to my teachers and they knew that I had a passion for mental health, so they suggested Canadian Mental Health Association. And it was probably a month after my practicum ended that I was able to maintain a positive relationship with my potential boss, and she asked me to come on for a contract job, and that contract lasted about 8 months before I was taken on full-time.
Sorry, Bruce, what was the question? Just what do I do now?
Sort of how you got into your job and what it entailed.
I got into my new job because I quit my old job. Yeah, as Bruce said, I'm full-time freelance. I started my own business in the last couple months. So basically my day-to-day is kind of what you'd imagine. It's chasing work and trying to find new clients. In my past job, it was sort of a perfect mix of journalism, running a magazine, and one of the, it was a trade magazine, so it was backed by two parent companies, and I was the communications and marketing manager for one of the parent companies. So my day was sort of split, straddling the fence. So that's what my freelance business is too. It's communications and journalism. So I'm still writing freelance pieces for different magazines, and as well I'm doing communications work for a variety of clients. Most of this is in the agriculture realm. That's sort of where I've started to specialize. The magazine that I ran was an agriculture magazine. The parent company was an agriculture company, so it's all focused around that. So that's the crux of my business too. It's all agricultural clients in Western Canada, and same for the publications as well.
Okay, like Amy, I kind of felt like it was serendipitous for me to get my job. I graduated from SAIT in May 2015, and 1 month later, the local paper, I've lived in Okotoks for 25 years, the Western Wheel put out an ad that they were looking for a new reporter. So I applied and got the job about a month and a half after I graduated here. So it was a pretty perfect situation for me to be able to work at home. Not at home, but in my hometown. It takes me 5 minutes to get to work. My job is technically the news reporter for the Wheels, so that includes anything from covering town councils, the MD of Foothills council meetings, covering things that people in town have done, people in the area have done, any spot news that comes up, basically anything that comes up that isn't sports, arts and entertainment, or Black Diamond and Turner Valley is mine.
So thank you. So what, and maybe we'll do it in reverse order this time, starting with Krista, but what do you like about your job, and is there anything that you don't particularly like about the job?
Right from the start, this has never changed. I love that every day is completely different. The deadlines don't change. I still have to write 8 to 12 stories a week, but I am talking to different people, doing different things on a regular basis. Every hour is different from the previous hour. The only things I could say that I don't like are potentially having to wait on other people, relying on other people to be able to get my job done. It turns into a lot of hounding phone calls, trying to nail people down to do an interview. So I don't like things out of my control, and that's my own issue, but that's, for me, the only downside of the job.
similarly, what I like about what I do is that everything is different as well every day, and there's a good variety. Even though I specialize within one subject area, there's still quite a lot of variety in things that happen day to day. I like that now that I run my own business, I'm in control of everything I do. I can choose what I want to write about, which is very nice, because some topics, when I was a reporter and when I did communications work for a company, I had to obviously do some things that were kind of boring, didn't really excite me, but I had to do them because it was my job. So now I've got a little more autonomy, which is really nice. So yeah.
Is there anything you don't like, Trevor?
No, now, no. There was a lot, and that was why I quit my job. So, yeah.
I personally love my job. It has a personal connection to me. I wouldn't say that there's anything I hate, but I have encountered some very frustrating scenarios where I also create a lot of our marketing materials, whether it's for our own department, other departments, and sometimes those departments have very short deadlines that is just very unrealistic to fulfill. And so when they come in, we have to let them know, like, hey, I can't do this in this amount of time, this is when I can do it by. And so they think that they can go ahead and create their own materials, but really, like, if you were working for Coca-Cola, nothing would go past their branding standards without going through the communications team. So it can become very frustrating when people decide to make their own materials and go completely off brand standards. So that's kind of something that I would say is a little frustrating working for a nonprofit.
Thank you. So I just wanted to point out, Krista said 10 to 12 stories a week. I think you guys probably don't write 10 or 12 in a semester, unless you're also working for the Wheel. But so that's every single week. And
we put out a magazine that goes up.
oh yes, plus the magazine, plus photographs, I believe. Some. Okay, all right. So we often, as instructors, we talk to you at the start of the semester about what you're hoping to do, and not everybody really has a clue what you might want to do at the end of the 2 years. But many people do have some thoughts about where they'd like to go after they leave here, after you leave here. And I'm going to ask each of them, and I'll ask Trevor to maybe kick this off. How did your post-secondary education contribute to what you do now? And I think I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, so I did the journalism program at SAIT, and right after I went to the U of C and did their communications program, the 2+2 it was called 6-7 years ago. I don't know if it's still called that. Anyways, everything of value that I learned was at SAIT, and then going to the U of C, I got to put on my resume that I had a degree, and I really don't think that U of C contributed to me getting any jobs other than the fact that I could say I had a degree, and people, like employers would tell me in interviews that they liked to see that I had a degree. For whatever reason, that maybe there was some kind of stigma attached to just having a diploma or something. But the reality is, like, all the tangible skills I learned were here, because the communications degree didn't really relate to communicating better. If anyone's been to university, you know it's a lot of theory, it's a lot of history-related things, no matter what the subject area. So I learned a lot of interesting things, but nothing that actually helped me do reporting better, interviewing better. You're writing academic papers, you're not writing news stories or feature stories. So SAIT for me, and I didn't quite realize it until I was a couple of years sort of removed from the academia, but SAIT was instrumental in helping me sort of get to where I am today.
So a lot of people, when I say that my job is a lot of social media, they're like, well, anybody can do that. But it's really like managing, most of it is creating a brand, and that is something that is a huge part of my job, and that's something I did learn at SAIT for communications. But it's also like the intakes, everybody having to filter everything, having to schedule up to like 5 to 10 posts a day. It does take up a lot of your time, and I think this is first year, correct?
This
Yeah,
is first year.
Okay, yeah, so in second year, you guys will learn Hootsuite, and that is a huge part of my job, is managing all of our social accounts through Hootsuite. I guess also, like InDesign and everything, so when I create our marketing materials, I didn't know any of this coming into journalism. So you are going to learn a lot of skills that will be utilized. Although you will also learn a lot of other things in the field. Like when I was in state, we didn't use AI, Adobe Illustrator, which I heard you guys are actually using this year. So that is a learning curve for me that I actually learned in the workplace. But other than that, everything that I learned at state, I've been able to apply in the workplace itself.
I found that my education had a huge impact on just feeling comfortable in the workplace, in doing what I have to do on a regular basis. I came here from a BA in English from the U of L, and that really gave me the basis of, first of all, my writing skills, but mostly my grammar and editing skills, which are huge in this industry. We spend a lot of time copy editing, whether it's our own work or one another's work, or seeing things on the page. So that education was instrumental for me. And the hands-on skills that I learned here at SAIT, I can't even credit this school enough with what it did for me to go into this industry.
Thank you. I didn't pay them to say any of that. So the next question I wanted to ask is, we're always giving you advice as in what you can do here to sort of make your dreams, your aspirations happen. And, often, we say things like, work hard and things like that. And I truly do believe all that, but I think it would be really helpful for you to hear from people closer to your age, sort of what one piece of advice you might give that would help them achieve their dreams and aspirations when they're done here. And we'll start with Krista, maybe.
I think the biggest thing is, Bruce said work hard, but I mean, really apply yourself and put yourself out there. Is there anybody in this room that's working for or volunteering at the Wheel? Yeah, that's huge, huge. I did that right from my first month here and ended up being the editor of the opinion section second year. And trust me, employers look at that. That showed them that I had initiative and that I had worked hard and put myself out there in a real world situation during school. If you're looking towards that writing side of things, definitely go for the Wheel.
Yeah, very similar. When I was here, I worked at the Wheel as well, and that was really big to help me even get some interviews just for initial jobs, because I actually had some clippings to show them, and they probably expected it to be a student newspaper, and it was, but I actually had done the work, so it really helped. I would just say, whatever you guys are passionate about, I'm beyond agriculture. I really love tennis, and I really wanted to be a tennis reporter of all things. And so I started writing tennis stories and had a blog and did all sorts of stuff. I would do anything. I'd go watch amateur tennis, because that was what I really wanted to do. And I knew that probably it would be very unglamorous, which it was, and ultimately I sort of changed horses midstream, but you have to really probably put in a lot of thankless time. Don't necessarily take that to mean free time, unless you're so sort of dedicated and committed that you don't mind working for free and sort of sacrificing all your personal time, because I'm sure you guys are all great writers and communicators and you shouldn't devalue your work, but you do really have to put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, to use a cliche phrase, but wherever you want to go, it's not just going to fall in your lap. I think the three of us and Bruce too have stories how things don't fall into your lap. You fight to pull them in your lap, and it's through a lot of hard work and convincing people and getting someone to try and take a chance on you as well.
for me, from a communication standpoint, sitting in your position right where you are right now, first year, I actually wanted to graduate in photojournalism, and obviously that didn't happen for me, and that was by choice. I thought, after going through the communications, I decided this is what I wanted to do, but it's also not just about your title, but it's about who you work for. So if you're passionate about animals, consider looking into communications where your focus is animals. Like for me, my focus or my passion lied in mental health, and so I was able to find a job in mental health with my title as a communications assistant. So there are plenty of niches out there, whether you're a writer, whether you're a photographer, whether you're going into communications or marketing, just always look around something that you're passionate about, and it'll make your job so much funner. If I was sitting anywhere else in a communications firm for like an oil and gas company, I would not say I'm having as much fun as I am today.
Thank you. And just because you knew I would, the only thing I want to add to that is it makes it a whole lot easier to make your dreams and aspirations come true if you were an A or a B student as opposed to a D student. So that's just something to kick around. Wanted to talk a little bit about job prospects, Krista is the only one who now working for weekly journalism or journalism alone, and Trevor is freelancing it. But I'd like to get your thoughts on job prospects for these graduates, when they leave, either in communications or in journalism or wherever. And Amy, maybe we'll start with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, so again, I got my job through a practicum placement within state. So I don't really know that prospecting kind of feel. I mean, it was kind of something I sat in and I was able to stay in, which I was very happy about. But I guess like if you want to get your name out there, even just volunteering, when I'm managing intakes, a lot of people are like, I want to get my bachelor's in this, but I need volunteer hours. So volunteering a lot in the fields that you want to work in, as well as in your practicums, maintain positive relationships with your potential employer. You don't know if that practicum placement, whether you like it or not, is going to have a position open by the time you finish. And if it is, then having those positive relationships are going to help you kind of weasel your way in to getting a job that you enjoy.
I don't think the job prospects are that great right now. There's always jobs out there. I just don't think the prospects are that great. Yesterday, just sort of in preparation for this, I just went on a couple job websites looking sort of for newspaper jobs. And so there's openings in Stettler, Olds, Grand Prairie, Prince Albert, Tofield, St. Paul. These aren't metro cities where there's lots of things happening. They're smaller centers. There are lots of things happening still in these places, but that's just a way of me saying if you really want to do reporting and journalism, these might be some of your first stops in your career, and that's just something you should know and be aware of. I don't know if you do know that. There's not jobs at the Calgary Sun or Calgary Herald popping up every other week, and if they are, none of you guys are going to get consideration because people who are already out there working as journalists for 5, 10, 15, 20 years are going to be the ones who are getting those interviews and getting those jobs. Maybe 5, 10 years from now, when a job opens up in a big city, if that's your aspiration, that would be realistic because you have a number of years of experience, but you're going to be potentially going to places like Tofield or Stettler. I worked in Rocky View County. I was really lucky. It's just outside Calgary. That was where I worked for 2 years, and I briefly worked in small town BC as well at a newspaper. So I really wanted to work at the Calgary Herald, and I sort of had to come back down to reality afterwards. On the communications side, just briefly, there's always lots of jobs on the communications side. You can go on Indeed or any job board and you'll see tons of communications jobs. The one thing that they'll ask for is experience. And it sort of seems weird that they want experience, but they want someone junior, and so it's how can you get experience while being fresh out of school, which is volunteer, work at the wheel. Like you were saying, if you're passionate about animals, find a place that will let you do some communications related work related to animals. So when the time comes for a communications job to come up, you can say, hey, look, I already did all this stuff. Give me a job interview.
I really don't have much to add after that, but I will just say that if you do take a position with one of those small town newspapers, it's actually very rewarding, and it is a great way to get that experience.
Thank you. And I'm just going to add to that. Graham Prairie was mentioned. I spent 2 years with Graham Prairie at the Herald Tribune. I actually went from the Winnipeg Free Press willingly to Graham Prairie so that we would have a bit of a northern adventure, my wife and I, and that's what we did. So a lot of people get it in their heads that they love to be where they are and they don't want to go anywhere else because it won't fit with their plans. You should always try to keep an open mind. And as Krista said, going to a small center will open up all kinds of opportunities. You will learn a ton about people, about the job. You'll be doing all kinds of different things. You're not just one thing. And then you move on. 2 or 3 years might be enough. Unless you happen to be working in a place that you love to live in as well. So don't be afraid to challenge yourself and to go outside of your comfort zone a little bit and be prepared to move somewhere where the job is. And because I teach research and because I feel the research is really important to everything that you're going to be doing here at SAIT and have done already at SAIT. I wanted to get each of the panelists, maybe starting with Trevor, to talk about the importance of research to what you do. So research being everything that we do, the gathering of information, the interviewing, talking to people, being aware of situations and things like that. So I'll just maybe get you guys to talk about that, and starting with Trevor, and then maybe Krista, and then ending with Amy.
Yeah, so research is, it's obviously important to what I do, but I'd say it's really important for me because I'm dealing with, for the most part, it's a highly technical subject matter, and it doesn't come naturally to me because I'm not from an agricultural background. I'm from Calgary, and so a lot of this stuff is what might be second nature for someone who is from a farming background or a ranching background is not for me. So I always have to put in a lot of time, and it involves me even still asking a lot of really basic questions and saying to people who I'm talking to, could you explain that to me like I'm 10 years old so I can understand it in really plain terms? Just because, like any industry, there's lots of jargony terms in agriculture as well, and you have to sort of cut through all that to really gain a solid understanding. So it's critical for me to just be researching things all the time and reading things as well. I've found that what I consider research is actually just reading newspapers and magazines, even if it's not something that I might be writing an article about or putting some communications documents together. There's been more often than not, something I'll have just read anyways comes back to help me because I read a story about it in a magazine or newspaper. So don't consider that, or please consider that research when you're reading other news and reading what someone else may have written on that same subject matter or a similar subject matter before you.
For me, research is vital. It's a daily thing. In the matter of a week, I could write a story on the need for a water pipeline for Okotoks. A lot of research and technical terminology going in there, government red tape, etc. The same week I could be writing about affordable housing, I could be writing about Operation Christmas Child, did an interview today with a young girl that has diabetes. Every single story is a different topic, and I'm not an expert in any of them. So talking to the right people, doing the right research is absolutely crucial to my job to make sure that I'm writing as thorough a story and as factual a story as I possibly can.
Working in a field where mental health is very stigmatized, you need to make sure that everything that you're saying and promoting is factual, and there is a lot of jargon and not right terminology when it comes to mental health, so you have to make sure that you're using the right language, because language does matter when you're addressing these kind of things. For example, when I was at a trade show just last week, it was kind of passport driven, so when I go out sometimes prior to the event, they'll be like, can you give us a question that employees can ask you so they can get a stamp and they'll be entered for a draw. And one of my questions was, what was the ratio of Canadians per year that have a mental illness? And it was 1 in 5. However, Homewood Health, who was also there, had a very similar question where it was, and the answer was 1 in 4, and the question was how many people will experience a mental health challenge. And to a lot of people, that sounds like the exact same thing: mental illness and mental health challenge. And so they thought that either CMHA was wrong or Homewood Health was wrong, when really it was just like a language misinterpretation. So it's making sure that everything that you promote and say is factual and it's correct and not jargony.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, and you may not have an answer for this, so don't feel you have to say something, but was there a project or two that may have come up in either what you're doing now or what you did before, or even at school, that required research that was really demanding and challenging to do? Maybe a story that or a project you were working on and how did you handle that? How did you kind of overcome that? And Amy, we'll just start with you this time. You're holding the mic. Thank you.
So I'm actually in the middle of one of those situations right now. We're just about to launch a recovery college, and I have to interview the head of our recovery college team about what is a recovery college, and I have absolutely no idea what a recovery college is, and I don't know what kind of questions I can ask around it because I have no general idea of it. So kind of the steps that I'm taking now is kind of sitting down, and those first questions I'm going to ask is, what is this? So I can go back, study it, and then ask the further questions that need to be asked for us to be able to promote this externally, trade shows, marketing materials, because I need to have that right language, and I need to communicate to other people who are going to come in and have no idea what this is. So it's asking those initial questions of what is something versus like how can I address it.
One of the recent biggest projects was I just wrote a feature piece on for the Canada 150. It was initially going to be 150 years of agriculture in Canada. That turned out to be way too broad, so I made it into the history of wheat in Canada, which I thought would start around 1867. It turned out it started in the early 1600s in Nova Scotia, and so what I thought would be a nice, easy, sort of 1,500 word piece turned into a 3,800 sprawling feature that took about a month and a half to write. I interviewed about 12 people for it. All the information I couldn't actually find online. Through interviews with people, they would tell me they had academic journals related to what I needed to read, and they would scan those, and then I would have to read those. So I ended up probably pouring through about 300 pages of scanned documents. You know, you can't use Apple F and find keywords you need. I actually had to physically read every word, which was so painful, but ultimately so rewarded by the time the essay was finished. But it took a lot of time and effort, and I think the key to that was just all the research that went into it up front, and just knowing that, I just kept telling myself that there would be a light at the end of the tunnel, even though I couldn't really see it for quite a long time.
Trevor, before you pass on the mic, I'm just curious, when you were working on that one piece, were there other projects you were working on simultaneously, or was that something that was getting all of your attention?
No, so I was writing that was the cover story for our July issue, and then I was writing a couple other stories for the issue, editing the whole issue, and doing all my regular communications and marketing work on top of that. I basically did the story after work for about 6 weeks.
Thank you.
A lot of my research comes from interviewing people. And sometimes when I have a larger topic, that gets a lot harder to narrow down, especially when it's something that people are either passionate about or upset by. A recent one is an affordable housing issue in Oaks. There is a nonprofit that organizes subsidized housing for families in need, and there's been quite a few accusations against them from some of the residents that they're being treated unfairly, singled out, being tried to be evicted for no reason, that kind of thing. So there were 3 people that came to me that each had interviews more than an hour long. A lot of it is hearsay, so you have to go through and figure out what can I use and what can't I, what's going to be libel, and what can I actually put in my story. On the other hand, when I go to the organization who's providing the housing, of course, I get stonewalled. They can't say anything because it's a privacy matter. So the only way around that is to kind of ask them what their standard procedures are, and they can't talk specifically to the issue. So it makes the story a little bit harder to put together, it takes a little bit more time. I'm siphoning through a lot of information and trying very hard not to put myself or my paper into a position where we can be accused of libel, but still trying to get these people's stories across, because they are in some pretty dire situations. There are people that can't afford to pay more than $200 in rent and would be homeless without this housing, and they're being thrown out for no reason. So it's that's a tricky one. Another one is, you may or may not be aware about one of the Las Vegas shooting victims lived in Okotoks. Her name was Tara Rowe, and that was a difficult one to get the interviews on. Mostly the first day, we kind of heard through Facebook, people were throwing out messages that they hoped Tara was okay and she was missing and they didn't know what to do about it. So we did a brief, threw something together really quickly. It was our production day, we were putting the paper to bed. We just got something really quickly into the paper that she was missing. And right before we went to press, we found out that she had actually been declared as deceased. So we changed that really quickly. The next thing was, of course, the follow-up. We wanted to speak to her family, her husband. He was turning down everybody. So a little trick that I actually learned from Bruce, approach this delicately. He was grieving. He was in a really awful situation. He had actually put a family friend in charge of his communications. And so to get the interview with him, I actually personalized it. I've lost 2 brothers in the last 6 years, and I approached it in that way. Offered my condolences first, and then told him that I would like to tell Tara's story. It's another trick I learned from Bruce. It wasn't, hey, can we talk? It was, I'd love to tell her story. The community's grieving with you, and we'd love to share who Tara was. After her funeral, 2.5 weeks later, Zach came to my office, and we sat down and chatted for a good hour and a half, and the story ran last week. It was heart-wrenching, and it was one of the most difficult ones I've ever done, but it was definitely rewarding, and the family truly appreciated it.
Thank you, Krista. Difficult story indeed, and yes, both Krista and Amy would have heard me tell the same story that I told you about having to interview the grieving mother in Grand Prairie, whose daughter had been murdered in Edmonton, and so I appreciate you telling that story. One thing that we talked about, Mo, you better start writing pretty quick. We're almost done. One thing that we talk about in our very first class and the second class, we talk about some of the concerns that you guys might have. I think we did this in the second week, you know, having had a week of courses and classes. But one thing that a lot of people identify as a concern is interviewing strangers, just talking to people. A lot of us are shy by nature, and the thought of interviewing anybody, whether it's an interview like Krista had to do, you know, talking about the Las Vegas shooter victim, or no matter what it is. And I'm wondering, and the question I'd like to ask, and maybe we'll just do it in reverse order. Krista, you're holding the mic. Whether when you started here, whether interviewing was something that intimidated you, or whether you always found it easy, and if it intimidated you, what did you sort of do to get over that, or if you found it easy, why did you find it easy, and how did that kind of work for you? So, does that make any sense?
To be honest, when I registered for this program, I thought it was going to be terrifying. I remember my first assignment with Jim, the first one where we weren't sent out as a group or put together in a group to ask each other questions. And it was go find some people on campus. You can go in a group, go out there and ask them some questions and bring back what you asked them and what their responses were. And it was just kind of a practice interview session. And a bunch of people took off in groups of 2 and 3, and I thought, I'm not going to get anywhere if I always go in a group. So I just went out there and did it. And the very first person I approached talked to me. It was easy. I didn't really ever look back.
Interviewing wasn't, I'm pretty chatty and curious, but interviewing always felt a little, I don't know, it always felt a little forced. And when I first graduated, like, I really thought I was just going to be the next best reporter, like naming the stars kind of thing. And I was like pretty high on myself, and I always would try and like make any story really scandalous. And so like when I was interviewing people, I'm positive, and a couple people told me, thankfully, that I was like way too aggressive. Like it's a story about like, you know, parking fee increases, and I'm talking about it like it's like a homicide story or something, you know, trying to like find the body. And yeah, so I sort of had to learn to mellow out, and that some stories were just stories and some were boring stories. But the one thing I kind of have learned over the years is, you know, some interviews you might go into and you might already know that they're going to be difficult for one reason or another. So I always try and find out something about the person that I might be interviewing. And the one example I have is I interviewed a man from Iceland once for a story, and I knew going into it that he had kind of a limited, he was a shy guy and he had a limited grasp of English. And so I went on Wikipedia and I just sort of looked up a couple things about Iceland, just, you know, like random trivia you'd share with people. And so when we talked, I asked a few questions about Iceland and sort of dropped some of the things I learned from Wikipedia, and he was so like blown away that I knew something about where he came from, that the interview was, it went amazing. Like I'm still telling the story, but it was like 5 years ago. So doing a little bit of that on the back end can really help for an interview.
I'm a very anxious and timid person. So interviewing for me was very difficult at first, though I did in the end learn to treat it like a conversation. I never had to go through an interview where being like sensitive, like the shooting, I've never encountered that, so I wouldn't be able to speak on that. There was one case though where I wanted to do an interview with a police officer for when fentanyl was becoming a crisis. Red flag, don't walk into a police station asking to talk to somebody about fentanyl. That's a red flag. It's finding the right people to talk to, and they'll be able to answer your questions properly. When I went into that police station and asked for somebody, he's like, why do you think that you can talk to anybody about that? He's like, I'm not going to hand you off. Because it doesn't look good for yourself. So researching who you can talk to and the most appropriate person to talk to. And I did end up having an interview with, I can't remember his name, he was the head sergeant of that case, so he was comfortable talking to me. He understood that I was a student and it was actually an assignment and I wasn't just trying to figure out how to make fentanyl. It really did not look good for me at all. So yeah, researching the correct person to talk to. And then again, treating it like a conversation. When you go into interviews, I always thought, am I going to ask the wrong thing? Am I not asking enough? And if you end the interview thinking like, maybe I didn't ask the right questions, or there are other things that might come up in your head later, like, oh, I should have asked this, just let them know at the end of the interview. Is there any way that I can get in contact with you if I have any more questions? And more often than not, they will say yeah, and they'll give you an email or phone number.
So Amy, having learned that lesson, what would you have done differently rather than walking into a police station cold, looking for somebody to interview?
So I kind of gave up hope when I went into the police station. They were like, nobody's going to talk to you. Why do you think that you can get an interview? Just like that. And so after talking with a few of my journalism friends, I learned that there is a communications person that you will often be able to be directed to, whether it's sports, whether it's CPS, for any matter, there is a communications department that focuses on media. And often when things like this happen, media releases go out, and they tell you contact this person. So when they told me like you should get in touch with someone from communications, I went on their website, I found the person in communications that I could get a hold of, and they directed me right away, actually within like a day. Yeah, so communications departments are often where you want to go when you want to talk to somebody.
Yeah, Amy's absolutely right. Communications departments are where you need to go. And I understand this because, you kind of look at communications people in some ways like gatekeepers to people you might need to interview. So you need to talk to a police officer, but you have to talk to the comms person first to basically get their blessing to go ahead and do the interview. You can skirt it in whatever sort of clever ways you come up with, but you also have to know that comms person is going to be pissed at you, and that might be the last time you get to interview that person. This happened to me when I was in my comms role. Like I had some reporters, we would always have our chairman of the board be interviewed for whatever. He would always provide official comment, and some reporters got his number and his cell phone number, and so they would just call him directly. And you only find out after the fact when the story's in print, and it would really piss me off because I didn't get to prep him on the interview, which is something in comms you do. You write what they say. That's that's sort of the magic behind it, I guess. But if you do that and you get a temperamental comms person, they'll just stonewall you, and you'll never get an interview from that person again. And that too, if you go into a smaller center, where it might be a place like Okotoks or Airdrie, where I was in Rocky View County, there's only so many of those spokespeople to go around, and if you burn all those bridges, you're going to have a hell of a time lasting like 3 to 6 months in that community, because everyone will know you as that punk reporter who doesn't sort of follow protocols. And I know it's kind of annoying to go through the comms person for that, because it feels disingenuous kind of, but you kind of have to play the game to some extent.
So sort of related to that, I'd like to ask, somebody asked me the other day, how do I interview a police officer? And I basically said the same way you would interview a homeless person, with respect and be straightforward in your questions and that type of thing. Is there anything? Some people find it very intimidating to interview somebody in authority, because we're used to being interviewed by them. You know, why were we following that vehicle so close that we actually rear-ended it? You know, why did we blow over 0.05? Why did, you know, all kinds of things, and not always a pleasant experience. So is there anything you guys could provide in the way of advice as to interviewing, you know, somebody in authority, or a mayor, or, you know, politicians are, and I am one, so, you know, we're horrible in getting our heads so inflated, we think we're just the cat's ass, and you know, is there anything you can talk about, and don't feel you have to, but anything you could offer?
I do this on a daily basis. In Okotoks, it's a little bit different, I think, maybe. I'm not expected to go through a communications person or an executive assistant in order to talk to the mayor. I have his cell phone, his home phone, and his office phone, and I'm welcome to use any of them. So it's a little bit of a different situation for me. When we do interview him, the biggest thing is, I think just to be careful with your questioning, know the issue that you're calling about first. He wants to answer very directly. He wants to answer on behalf of the entire council. And for that matter, so do the councillors when I call them. I've got all of their personal contacts as well. So that community is actually great, and the MDA Foothills is the same. I'm free to call any of the councillors or mayor at any time for any story, and they will speak to me. But I'd better be well versed in what I'm going to ask them when I go in. Because if I go in not knowing what I'm talking about, they don't know how to answer, and they can't answer on behalf of council if I don't understand the topic myself, at least to some degree. Now, to be honest, there are a lot of times where I call them and say, can you just explain this to me in layman's terms, please? Because I don't do planning jargon, and they're happy to do that too. The Okotoks RCMP are fabulous to work with. They will talk to us about anything, anytime. If we get a media release, we can call them. They are really out in our community, so is municipal enforcement. They're out wanting to be part of the community, so they're willing to talk to us at any time. And for me, interviewing any of them is the same as interviewing the person who donated $5,000 to a charity yesterday. They're all just they're just people, and their position happens to be different.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything to that?
I would just say that people in my experience, police and politicians are really well trained to deal with the media. They go through actual media training courses, so they simulate interviews, and they know the types of questions and perhaps common pitfalls that a reporter might put them in, and so they learn how to escape those and that sort of thing. So it's just my experience that politicians and police officers don't take anything personally when you're grilling them on a question, because typically it's about something bigger than them. If you're doing like a hard-hitting story and you're talking to a police officer or politician, chances are it's probably not about them. It might be about a policy or a crime that happened or something. So if you're really hammering them with questions, they know that you're doing a job, and I think you just have to know it to the other way, that they're doing a job, and you know, they can't necessarily tell you all the details, because that would mean they would get fired or they would be in some serious trouble. So, but don't hesitate to grill them. Don't think you're hurting their feelings by asking some, you know, back-to-back hard-hitting questions.
I actually don't think I have anything to add to that.
Okay, thank you. So I always talk about, love it how I say we always talk about, I always talk about taking notes versus recording, and I definitely recommend and always have taking notes physically and having a recording as a backup. Everybody seems to be different when it comes to actually working in the business, whether it's communications or journalism. So I'm going to ask all of you, maybe starting with Amy, you're holding the mic. Do you take notes, or do you record, or do you do both, and what and why?
So I do both. I have encountered times where my recording actually gets, what's the word, like skewed, or like while I'm in an interview. I guess, for example, when I was doing a tour of the Calgary Stampede and the Grandstand show, we were moving around a lot, and often when somebody was talking and we were moving at the same time, my recording got muffled, and that's when my notes, I could really rely on my notes. There have been times where my notes get lost or ruined, or I can't read them, that my recording can back me up, so it goes both ways.
Yeah, I do the same. I record and I also write down notes. And I think if you just record, I mean, that kind of means you have to listen to the whole thing again. And these phones up at the front, like, you guys can't see the time signatures. So if one of us says something that you want to make note of, and you're not writing notes, you're gonna have to listen to this whole thing again. Or try and find it or skip around and be like, oh, where was that? I think it was here. So even if you're just writing notes and something interesting is said by Krista at 8:43 on your thing, just write 8:43, and then you can go back and listen to it 10 seconds before and that little chunk.
I was adamantly a write the notes down kind of person when I went to SAIT for sure. Hardly ever used my recording except for when I had to. And then I started that way with the Western Wheel as well, but I developed severe carpal tunnel really quickly. And I found the only way to get around that actually is that now I do primarily record. I have to, I have no choice. I have a little device that I plug in that I can put my recorder directly to my phone, so when I'm doing telephone interviews, it's recording it for me. I do have to go back and listen to almost the whole thing and transcribe it. I do a lot of typing in a week because of that. However, I have a really good memory, so I know, and I'll hit the T mark on my recorder as I go in, so I can go back and hit those important points, and I'll know where to skip and where to go. However, I also still take notes, just not as rigorously while I'm recording. So when somebody says something important, I've got that down, and that has saved my ass a few times, because there are times where I'm doing something, phone rings, and I grab the recorder and plug it in, and I've accidentally plugged it into the headphone jack instead of the recording jack, and I have nothing. All I can hear is myself. So at that point, thank God, I have my notes that I've written down with the important quotes, and I can type those into the computer right away and still have the interview fresh.
Warms my heart to hear you say that. Kevin Rushworth isn't here, but if he was here, he would say, despite what Bruce says, I record everything. I never take a note. And then in his next breath, he would have said, and yes, there have been times when I've lost a whole week's worth of interviews off my recording device, whatever it was, a tape recorder or on his phone, and he's been hooped. So there's definitely different things that work for people, and people like Krista. There's physical challenge involved with the carpal tunnel syndrome, so it. Some people at the beginning of this said, can I use my keyboard to take notes? And I said, take notes however you want to take notes. I don't recommend you using a keyboard to take notes, and you've heard me say that in class many times. I don't recommend it, but if that's what works for you, then do that. But when it's raining at 3 in the morning and you're outside a burning apartment block, you're not going to be taking notes on a keyboard. So I think I just have one other question that I want to ask, and then I'm going to, so please think of some questions that you might want to ask. Is there one question when you're talking to somebody in a journalism interview or trying to get information for a communications project you're working on, is there one question that is kind of your stock question that you might end a conversation or an interview with?
Hands down every time, is there anything else you'd like to add? That's at the end of every single interview. Sometimes they'll say, no, I think we got it, and sometimes they will continue going and we'll have another 20-minute conversation because it sparked something in them. There are also times where I feel like I'm getting to the end of my interview, but I just don't have that golden piece that's going to make my story yet. So sometimes I come up with more personalized or trickier questions. This is usually with more feature stories. The one on Tara Rowe, we got toward the end and her husband had done a great job of coming in and telling me everything Tara had ever done and how great she was with the kids and how involved in the community, but he hadn't got that personal touch yet. And so at the end, I just looked at him and I said, what was your favorite thing about her? And that's where he kind of broke down a little bit, and he gave me that piece that I was looking for. He said, I never thought I'd meet anybody like her. I don't know what else to say, she was just my person. And that was the end of the story.
The one question I would say ditto for sure. That is there anything else you'd like to add? But the one question I'll always ask, for the most part, is just why, because the question of why often gives very philosophical answers from people, and that's where you get those colorful quotes that Bruce probably talks to you guys about in class. When you ask a person why they play tennis for a living, you'll get that philosophical answer, and that'll actually shed some light on their character and their persona a bit more, as opposed to just the who, what, where type questions.
Obviously, I agree with both of them, that, is there anything else you want to add? But it's not also, or I guess it's not just about what you want to end it with, but how do you want to start it? So going into the interview, don't treat it as just an interview. Have a conversation with that person beforehand, get to know them, because sometimes that'll open up more questions for you to ask, or change your questions, or sometimes they'll say something and you're like, wait, tell me more about that. So sometimes your story will go completely in a complete different direction. So even though, like, is there anything you want to add? Sometimes they'll just begin the interview that way.
Excellent. So it's like an icebreaker phase, but it's not a throwaway phase. Like it's not, it's something that actually will produce. That's kind of what I got from that, right? So we're not doing too bad time-wise. Does anybody have any questions? I've got another microphone up here. You know how bloody deaf I am. I'd really appreciate if somebody could take that microphone and just wander back there and well, first of all, does anybody have any questions? If you've got great voices, maybe you can yell it out, but no, I'm going to ask people to use a microphone. So, David, why don't you start, and then maybe you can be the person who then takes the mic around.
Okay.
So, but why don't you ask your question? It's very hard for people down here not using a mic for somebody at the back to hear. So, go ahead, David. Thank you.
My name is David. I'm a first-year journalist student. My question goes to Trevor. Being self-employed, what was the most difficult and challenging aspect of starting a business? Because it's not easy to be self-employed. You need big budget and you need to hire staff and all that. So what advice can you give us to fellow students here in terms of being self-employed? Thank you.
Yeah. So the challenges I've faced, and I've only been freelancing. I've only just started my own business about 2 months ago. Before I quit my day job, I spent about the last 6-7 months before that squirreling money away. So when some months were not as lucrative, which I'm fully anticipating there to be those months, I saved up about 20 grand, and I know that's by this time next year that'll probably be in the negative numbers. Well, I hope it's not, but it could be, and I'm fully prepared and okay for that. So my wife and I still have to pay for rent and diapers for our kid and all that kind of stuff. Like, there's a lot of expenses beyond just I need a new computer or I need batteries for my voice recorders, just to cover those expenses. So I saved up a bunch of money before, and the other challenge is, where do I get work? Because, like I said, what I enjoy about the job is I can do what I want, when I want, but also that can mean I'm not doing something because it doesn't seem appealing, which then just means I'm sitting around, and I'm not making any money sitting around. So that can kind of cause some anxiety if I think about it for too long. So it's marketing 101. Like I'm every day, like everyone I talk to, I always ask, do you have anyone else I could talk to? Is there some work that some of your friends in their companies might have that I can act as an agency for? So it's just that constant self-promotion, which kind of doesn't come natural to me, so it takes a lot of mental energy.
Anybody else want to? Okay, thank you, David. If you don't mind, David's going to be the one to bring the mic around.
What's David's last name? His last name, sir. How it's spelled?
K-A-Z-I-M-I-R-O.
One more time, please.
K-A-Z-I-M-I-R-O.
So my name is Justin. I'm also a state student here. My question is for Amy Price. As a marketing, like in the business of marketing, how important was your portfolio with all your projects and everything at the end of your 2 years here? How important was it using that to get a job, or people ask for like some of your work? Did you use the projects that you did in school to help build towards your portfolio for your jobs?
Honestly, I didn't go into it with a portfolio. It's a hard question for me to ask, because my, I guess like I got my job out of my practicum, so they had firsthand experience of what my capabilities are or what I was capable of, and so they got to see that firsthand. I didn't go in with a portfolio. I simply went in with a cover letter and resume, and after my 4 weeks with them, they're like, hey, we really liked your work. We really liked just having you in the workplace. Do you want to come back for a position? And so I said yes. So I apologize, I can't fully answer that question, but they did get to see me hands-on, like firsthand, of what I was capable of doing.
Justin, last name, please.
My last name is Bartzak, B-A-R-T-C-Z-A-K.
One more time, please.
B-A-R-T-C-Z-A-K.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate you guys wanting to get their last names. You can do that after. Okay? We'll make use of the panelists we have here. So, but please do ask questions.
How do I spell last name?
Yes, I know it's important.
I was just wondering, how do you deal with like the story you don't want to write? Or like, I think Bruce gave an example once where someone wasn't comfortable being interviewed because it was like a very serious topic, and they were refusing to be interviewed, but their boss was like, no, you need to get interviewed. How do you deal with that?
In 3 years I've been with the Western Wheel, I've only ever had one story that I absolutely refused to do. It was when the issue of euthanasia was coming up, and physician-assisted death, and we did stories on the legislation and everything about it. We went to the open houses that were hosted by our Member of Parliament, and I'd spoken to a lot of people that work for the country hospice out near Okotoks and places like that who had definite opinions on it, and we had done those stories. We've got a phantom editor in our office. We sometimes joke that she is. She used to be the editor. She does some of our vacation coverage and those kinds of things. She was happened to be there one week and decided that I should write a story and I should go and find somebody who wants to die and find out why. And I flat out refused. I wasn't going there. I was not going to approach this subject. She didn't know of anybody. She wanted me to just basically track down cancer patients and find out whether they wanted to use this service. So that was one that I absolutely turned down, and my editor backed me on that. And he said, I'm not going to make you do anything that's personally objectable to you. So that's the only one I've ever actually turned down. There's a lot of stories I don't want to write because they're dreadfully boring, but you push through and you do what you have to do.
See, David, this is why you're doing this.
Hi, I'm Sam. Just one quick question. Have you ever experienced a specific situation where a story completely depends on one person for an interview? Like you specifically need to talk to that person, and through whatever reason you can't contact them, or they're refusing to give that interview, or for whatever reason they just didn't manage to get back to you before your deadline. How have you resolved that situation?
And that
Is this for all
happens.
three, or all three?
It happens for me more often than you would think, probably at least once a week. There's always a story that will hinge on at least one person, that the story might be about them, or they might be the only person that is the expert in that field, or whatever it happens to be. Basically, we kind of have a 2 or 3 week window that we will give them. Continue hounding, sending texts, emails, phone calls, whatever it takes. Sometimes if it's a place of business, I'll show up on the business, like at the counter, and see if they're around. If after 2 or 3 weeks we can't get that interview, basically we consider the story dead. You can't go any further.
In my experience, sometimes I would just write a story that, Sam couldn't be reached for comment. If you were being a real turd, I might say that Sam refused comment to try and get back at you. And it's totally valid to say Sam refused comment if you refuse to let me interview you. You can phrase it a number of ways. Yeah. But typically, I would just, unless the story was about you, I would try and find someone else who had a similar expertise or understanding to get a comment.
The only time that's ever happened to me was going to SAIT. I was doing a story for my website, and it was a feature piece, so it was based off of one person and her success in this niche. And she said she was great for an interview. I emailed her questions because she was on tour a lot, and I gave it probably like 2-3 weeks, and every maybe like third or fourth day I'd email her like, hey, I have a deadline, can you please get back to me? She never did. So the route that I took is staying in that niche of so her name was Vishal Lu. She was a performer, kind of like a contortionist. She was a very odd person, basically. So I took that and I turned it into something like along the same line. So I still went with a performer. I actually went with a performance troupe called Kabuki Gun. So it was still under the same kind of idea of a story, but it wasn't a feature piece on one person. I had to kind of go somewhere else with it. Yeah.
Just to add to that. Trevor's comments kind of sparked something else. We do that a lot as well. The Western Wheel contacted so-and-so and they weren't available before press deadline or something like that. Sometimes that will trigger them and get them to call you back. So there's been quite a few times where we've had a follow-up story because a development company will be like, hey, we didn't have time to get back to you. Well, we gave you 2 weeks. We put in there that you didn't call us back. So would you like to talk now? Sure, let's get my half of the story out. So sometimes it works out eventually, you end up getting 2 stories out of it.
Thank you.
Hi, well, my name is Shahid, and my question is for Amy. I was always I came into this program, I've always wanted to help other people, and I feel like it's so inspiring of what you're doing. But I was also wondering, because mental health is something I always was involved in, I've always been interested in it. I was wondering if you can be in a way without marketing or anything, just how would you have a career-wise in it by just writing and communicating with others?
So I guess aside from something that I can take away from my job personally is I work with a lot of people who just want to share their story. So I have the privilege to talking to people on a weekly basis about their resilience story, about like depression, anxiety, addiction, all that kind of stuff. So I guess that blog aspect I never would have thought myself, but being in a field where I get to work with people like that, it's something that I would still take away, and say I was to move on to a different job, I would still love to connect with people in that sense. Just kind of be a peer supporter in my own way. I guess connection is a huge thing for me, and that's something I would like to carry on personally.
And the last one?
Yes.
My question is to the three of you. Did any one of you ever cover or write a story which is too deep, emotional, where you had to cry or can't control yourself, and how did you overcome that? Thank you.
I've never had to cover a story that made me emotional, but working with people who have emotional stories, I do get emotional sometimes, like being able to relate to that on a personal level, or just like sympathy for that person and everything that they had to endure. It does get emotional, and sometimes I'm thankful that a lot of times when I connect with these people, it is over the phone or over the email, that I don't have to show that emotion. But I've never actually had a story.
For me, I can't handle stuff like, what she was talking about, writing about that Las Vegas victim, like, I can't handle that kind of stuff. It's too hard for me. So, like, part of the reason why I write about what I write about is, like, it's pretty unemotional. It's farming. Like, you don't cry writing. I'm serious. Like, you don't cry writing about farming, unless someone maybe lost their farm or something. But, yeah, like, because I used to have to cover crime and things like that, and there's like some really awful things I had to write about, and like they took a toll on me mentally. So I like tried to not write about that kind of stuff.
There are times, absolutely, that it hits you a little bit close to home. I don't know, you probably noticed, I still get a little choked up even just talking about the Tara Rose story, because she was huge in our community, and it was an honor, but also very difficult to write that story. Quite honestly, I don't try to hide it. I'm an emotional person, and when I'm talking to people in these situations, it's a connection with them. If I'm welling up while they're talking, it's showing that I have a heart and I actually do care about their situation and their story. There was another one about a year ago, a young girl who was diagnosed with cancer when she was 18 months old. And I talked to her mom for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month. And it had been a 1.5-year battle, or 2 years almost. And her mom started to, she started to get emotional and break down partway through the interview, and so did I. I have a daughter who was the same age at the time, and that was a difficult one. But, we kind of bonded over that, and it actually made the rest of the interview conversation a lot smoother. We had a connection, and it just kind of flowed differently.
So I'm Rizwana. I was just wondering, you guys have so many stories and stuff to write, like you said, 8 to 12 will be sometimes more. How do you manage the time with that? I mean, you guys also mentioned having kids and a family, so how do you manage to have time for everything?
It's every minute at a time. That's the motto for my life. I have 4 kids at home. And our press deadline is, we basically stop writing by 4 o'clock on Monday and start laying out the paper. We work late every Monday night. We're back at it first thing 7:30, 8 o'clock Tuesday morning, because we have to have it out to our printer by 11. By 1 o'clock Tuesday afternoon, we have our story meetings. So by about 1:30 or 2 o'clock, we can start doing interviews, but really because we've worked overtime for 2 days, we all just kind of take off at 2 o'clock. Sometimes you can't do that. It depends on your week. I also lose every Wednesday morning at least, sometimes all day Wednesdays, sitting through MD Council. So for me, Thursdays, I am on the phone all day, 8-10 hours straight, calling people, making contacts, doing my interviews, and just getting it done. Some of those people don't call me back maybe till Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. That's the other thing in this job. It's not an 8 to 5 Monday to Friday. It never is. My kids are very used to us being out grocery shopping or something, and my phone rings, and I've got my recorder in my bag, and I'll be like, I'll be right back. And I go and take the phone call and do what I have to do, because you have to be available when your sources are available. Yeah, it's just, I try to save my evenings, make them free as possible. It's not always possible to do that, because there are things to cover in the evenings. There's a lot of community events and things that happen at night or on the weekends. We alternate weekends at the Western Wheel, so I'll work every 4th weekend. I mean, we're on call, we're going out to all these community events, and anything that comes up that weekend is your responsibility. So at least it's not every weekend, all the time, but yeah, it's a delicate balance. I think we do it okay in my house. My kids let me know when I'm not. They start to act out, and hey, mom hasn't been around enough, and I gotta show up a little bit more. So yeah, it's just, you just work at it every day and make it work.
Krista, just can I ask before you pass the mic off, if you are working a weekend, it's your weekend rotation, do you normally would you normally get 2 days off during the week?
No. If we work all weekend, we typically will get the following Friday off. However, sometimes that doesn't work either, depending on what the week looks like. So we try to do it as much as possible.
When I was a reporter, I would say I probably wrote a similar amount of stories, 8 to 12 to 15 if it's a busy week. And one thing I had to learn early on was that, writing a story, you got 3 sources. First one doesn't get back to you, and oftentimes, initially, I learned it quick, but I would wait for the call back, and I wasn't doing a lot else, because in my mind I was like, okay, I need to talk to this person before I can talk to the next person. You get past that pretty quick, because then you're going to be working like 15 hours a day waiting for that person to call you back. So you have to be really good at having your mind going like this all day long, because you're going to talk to 2 people about a story that happened at a council meeting, then you're going to talk to a cop about something unrelated, then you're going to talk to someone who's fundraising for something at their kid's school, then you're going to talk to someone else, but it's not going to be linear. It'll just be back and forth, and you'll talk to someone about something totally unrelated, and you got to switch gears and employ some empathy to get some good comments about a different story, and then you're talking to a politician about something. So you're all over the place.
So I'm obviously a 9-to-5 job, communications department, you come in, you do your work, you leave. There are times, like when we have our biggest fundraiser of the year, or Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, there are times that I'm going to be working a full weekend, or anywhere between 12 to 14-hour days. And I have to get up at 4 in the morning to be in the north, and I don't drive by 7. So there are times where I will be working overtime, but I'm thankful that my job allows that. If they don't really allow overtime, or they prefer not to have payout overtime. So then if I am working a 14-hour day or something, I get to take a day off the following week, as long as it's in the same pay period.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I really find this session valuable, and I know obviously I have to say that I came up with the idea, but it's really valuable to me for you guys to hear from younger people, and I'm not saying that Walter and Jim and I aren't young, but average age put us all together about 105. So it's nice for me to be able to present you with 3 really well-spoken younger SAIT grads who can speak from firsthand experience, recent firsthand experience, and give you their thoughts. And I really appreciate it. Before I forget, I want to thank David for being our microphone runner. Thank you very much, David. But also thank you to Amy and Trevor and Krista for giving up part of their days to come and talk to you. So let's show our appreciation. So we are done a little bit early. I don't know if this class, don't forget, one of the requirements of the assignment is to interview somebody, one of your classmates or somebody here. It doesn't have to be from your group. I suggest you do that now before you leave. That way you've got